school-based counselling services in Wales, there is a strategy, a national strategy, and the national strategy was put in place in April 2008. So it's actually quite well down the road in a sense, but in strategy terms for the Welsh Government, it's actually moved quite quickly. If I just say where it came from and why we have in Wales, as in Northern Ireland, and I know Scotland are looking at developing a school-based counselling programme. I think originally the idea was to have that in place by 2015. But in Wales, we had this for a specific reason, and you wouldn't actually want to wish this on any other country. But you're aware of the Clwch Inquiry report of the Children's Commissioner, the very first Children's Commissioner, the very first report that was done by the Children's Commissioner. And as you know, Wales was the first nation to have a Children's Commissioner, was called the Clwch Inquiry report. And that report was into allegations of sexual abuse in a school setting, going way back to the 80s and 90s, where young people, when the inquiry they were going through the inquiry, young people felt that they had nobody in school, easily accessible, that they could talk to about the sort of issues and the distress that they were going through. So the then Children's Commissioner, Peter Clark, put a recommendation in the Clwch report that there should be school-based counselling. And that recommendation was accepted by the Welsh Government. And in order to support that, the Welsh Government put, at the time, from 2008, £6.5 million over 3 years to enable this to happen. Now, bearing in mind the number of schools we have and the number of local authorities, for some local authorities, that was a reasonable sum and would mean that they could at least have one counsellor. For some local authorities with maybe 8 schools, 8 secondary schools and 50 or 60 primary schools, they would only have part of a counsellor to cover all of that. So it soon became evident that we needed to review that. And the Welsh Government, school-based counselling has had cross-party support. And over this next 3 years, from 2011, well in 2010-11, an additional £1.5 million was put in to school-based counselling. And from that has been maintained. So over the next 3 years, £14.25 million has been put in from the education budget into school-based counselling. Now that is a considerable amount of money. When we've counted up how much is needed, that's probably just over half of what is needed to really support children and young people, certainly from primary school age right through to secondary. But it's certainly a considerable amount, and it shows the level of commitment by the Welsh Government into school-based counselling. In order to get to the strategy, what needed to happen was a sort of a research project to look at what is really needed and what sort of counselling services should we actually develop. And it soon became evident that the strategy should really say what counselling is about. So while recognising that a lot of people do use counselling skills and support skills, and there's a lot of emotional health and support that can be put into schools, the strategy made it very clear that the counselling that we would put in would be formal counselling, that is one-to-one counselling by a qualified, trained counsellor who is working towards accreditation from for example, the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy, and is a member of a professional body such as the BACP or other. So it was very clear that this was going to actually put in place a new profession in schools. Now this profession would work alongside all the other strategies that are in place to support schools. I'm from a teaching background myself, and I wouldn't have wanted a counsellor to say that they were taking any pastoral care responsibility that I as a teacher would have had. It's really important to recognise that counsellors are there alongside a range of other support services for children and young people. But the counsellors it was a new profession in schools. And some of you involved in schools will know that community-focused schools, and all schools in Wales are community-focused, is partly about schools are no longer places where you just see teachers. You see a range of professionals working together to support young people. The other thing is, it obviously makes, it's obvious in a sense, but young people can only achieve if they are emotionally and psychologically well. If young people are feeling well, they're more likely to achieve in school. It sounds such an obvious thing to say, but we need to keep saying it. And the whole school improvement strategy of the Welsh Government is exactly that, that emotional health and well-being is at the centre of school improvement. As we decided to start with secondary schools, and the strategy makes that quite clear, because it was felt that in terms of talking therapies, that was the place where it was more likely that there would be a direct impact on children and young people, having taken into consideration that early intervention in terms of primary schools is equally as important. But we needed to start somewhere, and we didn't have enough funding, basically, to cover everything. What we did, though, alongside the secondary school development, we did start 4 primary school pilots across Wales. And luckily, for us, there's 1 primary school pilot in each of the areas across Wales. So from very, very early on, once the strategy was written, we needed to work alongside colleagues across Wales, mainly, I would say, behaviour support specialists or educational psychology specialists. We would not have been able to produce this without doing it in partnership with the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy. It looks quite hefty. I haven't got enough copies for you all, but if you would like to see exactly how the counsellors are working, we can talk a little bit about that. It's all contained in this toolkit, as we called it. And we keep updating it because, you know, we're finding that, for example, what about children who are not in school? What about children who are missing education, maybe who are home educated, or children who are in pupil referral units, or outside of mainstream school in some way, or not even attending school at all? So we're working with others and with colleagues in order to update this on a regular basis. And the 2 new ones that are coming out are working with asylum-seeking children, refugee children, and with lesbian, gay and bisexual and transgender children and young people. The toolkit also includes exemplar materials, so it's very practical. You know, for example, you know, what should a room look like in a school? How should a counsellor work alongside the pastoral care or within the school? And within the document, we made sure that every secondary school identified a link teacher. Just as in safeguarding, there is a designated teacher for child protection. That very often it's the same person. Sometimes it isn't. In the smaller schools, it will be. There is a link teacher for counselling, and they often pick up pastoral care as a range, and you can ask Claire or Teresa about that in terms of Cardiff in a moment. Also, how do we monitor this? You know, what are we looking for? And we did develop, alongside colleagues across the authorities, a sort of spreadsheet on what we're collating. And remember, it's all confidential, so it's a confidential service. It's self-referral as well as referral from staff, so young people can just refer themselves. That was quite difficult with some schools. You know, we had to sort of work, and different schools were on different journeys as far as that was concerned. Gillick competency, so a young person doesn't have to tell their parents they're accessing a counsellor, but obviously the counsellor will work with the young person if they need to talk to the parents and would help to sort of smooth that way as well. We also wanted to make sure that young people were very involved in the development of counselling, not just in each individual area, that was important, but on a national basis. So we actually worked with a youth group in Monmouthshire, and the counselling service in Monmouthshire worked with them to produce 2 DVDs. One, which is called Masks and Mirrors, and then secondly, it was they did a further DVD, young people 6 months on. The 4 young people that they used were all actors, but they were young actors in in Ysgol Gyfun Cymru and the school, and they were absolutely brilliant. The evaluation, we need to evaluate it. What we can see from that is that the level of distress that young people start with in counselling is reduced by the end of counselling. We know that we need more Welsh-speaking counsellors. We know that. That's already sort of become, so I'm working with universities to look at making sure that they positively discriminate in their courses. But we also know that we need more male counsellors, because where there are male counsellors, boys are more likely to access counselling. On average, it's 60% girls and 40% maths wasn't my strong point, 40% boys. Where there are male counsellors, that does go up. There's no doubt about that. So we need more male counsellors, and we need more black and minority ethnic counsellors. So we do need to expand the workforce. I think I will leave it there. Okay, do you feel like we've covered everything?